Hi guys, welcome to the open house today. So we'll go over the plans for this class starting in fall and a few words about USABO in general. So I've got a couple of slides that I've put together that we will go over these topics. So we'll start with a very rough overview of what the USABO competition is about. So when I say USABO, I'm referring to USA Biology Olympiad. And then we'll cover the topics we'll go over in the fall class. And we'll close with a few words about preparations for USABO and unique aspects of this class. Right, so that's an overview of what we'll do. And then if any of you have any questions, you can put it in the chat box, or you can simply unmute yourself and speak into the microphone or raise your hands. Okay, so we'll start with an overview of the competition itself. As many of you probably already know, there are 4 rounds. There will be an open exam round, and then that's followed by a semi-final exam, and then qualifiers for that. The students do better in that, so the 20 best students from there go on to the national finals, and the top 4 go on to represent USA in the IBO, or International Biology Olympiad. So 4 levels of difficulty, if you will. And you'll begin with open exams, and then as you go further down, there'll be fewer and fewer students. So that's an overview of the exam format. And you can access all of the details regarding each of these levels of the exam by visiting the USA Biology Olympiad website. So before we look at that, so the questions are mostly multiple choice format, especially in the open exam, the very first exam. And then you also have some short answer type questions and true false questions. So that's the general format of the different questions. So this is the website from USA Biology Olympiad. So you can see right now the registration is open for 2026, that's next year. And also there are other details regarding how to prepare for the exams, how to register for the exams. So anyone who is in grades 9 to 12 is eligible to register for the USA Biology Olympiad examinations. And many schools actually do participate. They are registered, and the schools register directly and they pay the registration fees. Now, if the school that you're going to is not registered or is not willing to register, you can also individually still participate. And a couple of ways in which you can do this. So on the USA Biology Olympiad website, there is a link that says my school is not participating in the USA Biology Olympiad, and that guides you as to what to do. But basically, the goal is to find a neighboring school, another school in your neighborhood that is participating, so that you can go to that school and take the exams. All of these are online exams. Okay, the most of the time we'll spend today is to go over the plan, right? What do we plan to do in this fall class? So there are 12 classes, and this is the overview of the 12 classes. So we have the topics are here in different colors. I've grouped them together based on the let's say the general groups, right? The first 2 weeks will focus on animal anatomy, physiology, and applications. So these applications could be in terms of research, could be in terms of clinical applications, for example, when it pertains to humans. So that's what we'll cover in the first 2 weeks. And then in the second 2 weeks, we'll move on to cover the rest of the other kingdoms except the plant kingdoms. So we'll do the prokaryotes, the protists, we'll cover the invertebrates, followed by vertebrates. And again, focus will be on looking at real-world applications involving these organisms. And then the next 2 weeks, week 5 and week 6, will focus on fungi, plants, biosystematics, so classification of plants. And then we'll close week 5 with plant anatomy. So that's a huge, big topic that you need to know really well for USA Biology Olympiad. And then in week 6, we jump into plant processes. Again, there are lots of important topics in this area and real-world examples or applications. And then we switch gears When you go to week 7 and 8, we begin with a discussion of genes, alleles, Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, and evolution. And then in the subsequent week, we'll look at genetics. So genetics involves several calculation kind of problems so that you can solve problems involving genetics. And then we'll do molecular biology. So your DNA replication, transcription, translation, reverse transcription, and then biotechnology applications. And then the next 2 weeks will focus on different topics. This week will be on biochemistry, learning about molecules, different cycles, for example, Krebs cycle, for example. And then we have week 10, we look at cell biology and cellular processes. And then week 11 focuses on ecology, ecosystems. And finally, week 12 closes with ethology. And then if there are any other topics that we haven't covered, we'll cover in week 12 as well. So that's an overview of the topics we'll cover. So, but basically you cover everything that you need to know for USA Biology Olympiad. But as you can imagine, each class is only 2.5 hours, 2.5 hours. So we'll try and make the notes as detailed as possible. But there's only limited time to go into details. We'll try and cover as much as possible within the time allotted. So let's start with some examples of topics we'll cover in the first two sessions, first 2 weeks. So what I put together is some examples of slides from the first 2 weeks classes. We'll cover the different body systems, each system in detail. And then we'll cover nerves, neuroscience in great detail because it's a hot topic in Biology Olympiad. So you need to know action potential, what happens during each phase of the action potential in terms of the ions moving in and out. We'll look at how different synapses work. Synapses can collaborate, they might facilitate each other or work otherwise. We'll look at the neurotransmitters in great detail, different neurotransmitters being used for different functions in the body. And then we'll look at the cardiovascular system in great detail. Here's one example of a slide from the cardiovascular system class. As you can see, the action potential is different from the action potential you'll see in other muscles, in neurons. We'll discuss that in that class. We'll look at applications of things going wrong in the brain, in the nervous system. Here's one example of an animation you'll see where we discuss Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's. Also another lecture, another class will focus on development, fertilization and development of the embryo. Again, we'll look at the different phases. Now, one thing you'll notice in many of my classes is there'll be a lot of animations. Since this is the Zoom class, virtual class, we can't really do experiments. But having animations gives you an idea of how things work, right? You can see things moving. So you'll see a lot of animations, and we'll include this in all the classes. And then this is some of the slides from the endocrine class. You'll learn about negative feedback as it applies to different systems, different endocrine systems. Learn about different types of different diseases that are of endocrine origin. So for example, type 2 diabetes is different from type 1 diabetes. So in high school science, biology Olympiad, we need to know more about the mechanisms in detail as opposed to learning what's the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. What's the mechanism that's different between type 1 and type 2 diabetes as an example, right? So need to go more into the molecular details of these different body systems. Here's another slide from the cardiovascular disease class. We'll look at the events that happen as the heart contracts. Of course, you need to know the different waves on the electrocardiogram. And then osmotic regulation is another big topic. Kidney is just one way in which you can regulate the osmolarity. There are other mechanisms of doing that. We look at sensory organs, and also applications in sensory organs. And some of these you would have covered in earlier classes, but we'll go into these in more details. So for example, if somebody has myopia, what is the basic problem in somebody with myopia? How do you correct it? And then other applications in other body systems. So again, I put together some slides from different classes. And within each class, we'll also have a quiz. There will be quiz questions during the class itself, and there will also be a take-home quiz. And the take-home quiz will be comprised of questions from past USA Biology Olympiad papers. So past USABO questions. So here's one example of a question. Here's another example, focusing on the endocrine system, focusing on the immune system. This one is focusing on the nervous system, neurons, action potentials. And this one is focusing on, let's say, action potentials to neurons. So, and we'll discuss the answers in the class, time permitting. Now let's go on to the next 2 weeks. We'll cover the protists, prokaryotes, invertebrates, and vertebrates. So here are examples of slides from the invertebrates class or protist class. So these are different protists we'll discuss. And then also learn about the importance of these arthropods. So many of these are vectors for diseases. And then learn to differentiate between the different groups of invertebrates. And again, wherever possible, we'll try and use animations to understand. So here, for example, is one animation showing you how the porifera or sponge actually functions. And then here's another session from another class, different types of invertebrates. And then more examples of invertebrates, in this case, cephalopods, in more detail. So I'm just showing you some examples of slides from different classes to give you a flavor for the different types of things we'll cover in the class. The difference between different organisms and vertebrates. So that will be the subsequent week. Again, we'll look at how you differentiate different vertebrates, different diseases, different adaptations. And again, we'll close these classes with actual questions from past USABO exams. So here are some examples focusing on vertebrates or invertebrates. So all of these are focusing on vertebrates. Okay, the next 2 weeks will focus on fungi, plants, plant systematics, plant processes. So we switch gears a little bit. So we'll talk about classification of fungi, real world applications, and then spend a lot of time on plants. So a little bit of time on classification. So this would be an example of your gymnosperm. We'll talk about the different types of gymnosperms, and then the angiosperms, and learn about key things about angiosperms. In this case, you're learning about the different walls of the flower, different layers of the flower, if you will. And then applications. So this is, for example, example of a table from Campbell Biology, which we'll talk about later on. So learning about how different products from different plants are used for medicinal purposes. And then plant anatomy, like I said, is a huge topic area. So again, we'll try and use wherever possible animations to understand what happens in the xylem, what happens in the phloem, why is the phloem of interest. So in terms of practical applications, what can you tap from the phloem? How can you kill a plant or tree if you're not careful? You can hurt the phloem, and if you hurt the phloem, you hurt the tree as well. Now, we go into tropisms, for example, but from the viewpoint of hormones. How do different hormones control plant tropism? So role of auxins will be big, but it will also cover all the different plant hormones. And all of these, again, are covered in the typical biology textbooks, starting with Campbell. So more examples of tropisms. And plant transport, as you know, is a big topic area. So movement of water, for example, on the top left, you're looking at water moving from the root hairs all the way into the xylem. And then how does water get transported in the xylem? And that brings us to the next topic area of transpirational pool. We'll learn about cohesion, adhesion, and photosynthesis in great detail, the light-dependent and light-independent reactions, the Kelvin cycle, and the stomata. What controls the opening and closing of the stomata will be a big topic area. Again, we'll try and use animations to understand how the stomata work in terms of controlling gas exchange and water exchange. And then photosynthesis in more detail, what happens at the molecular level. And then we'll close with questions from past exams, USABO exams. So here are examples of questions on plant transport, plant genetics, plant seeds, C4 plants, CAM plants, as opposed to C3 plants. Next, we'll move on to genes, alleles, evolution, and then the big topic area of genetics, molecular biology, biotechnology. So we'll start with a understanding of the chromosome itself, chromatin, and then DNA itself, RNA, what are the building blocks that make these, and then the functions that these serve. So we'll talk about DNA replication, right? So leading strand, lagging strand, and so on. And then we'll talk about DNA transcription, so DNA to RNA. We'll talk about reverse transcription. For example, the HIV virus does that. And then we'll talk about other viruses, how they get into the different cells. So here we're looking at how HIV gets into cells. We'll talk about genetic diseases. Not just knowing which are, let's say, sex-linked or autosomal dominant, but more importantly, knowing the origins, the molecular origins of these diseases. So chromosome mutations, chromosome duplication, what are different kinds of mutations, and we'll do several problems in genetics. So Punnett square will be an important method to understand for solving genetic questions. So here are more examples of problem sets we'll do using Punnett squares. And then evolution will be another big topic area. So here's an animation showing you evolution from a single cell organism to a multicellular organism to the early protists. And then you have hydra now forming, you have starfish, and then you have worms, and you have your very first reptiles appearing, fish and then reptiles, and the reptiles eventually evolving, and then you have the birds, and then you have your mammals, and eventually you have yourself, right? So learn about evolution and the forces that drive evolution. What is the evidence for evolution? And we look at different players in evolution. We'll talk about co-evolution. And then we'll close these 2 weeks with genetic engineering, also called recombinant DNA technology. So how do you work with DNA and proteins in the lab? So this is what happens in a lot of labs, both commercial labs and academic labs, because you can manipulate the gene sequence. We learn about a very simple technique called PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. What are the steps in polymerase chain reaction? Again, we'll use animations to understand them. Genotyping, how do you distinguish one individual from another individual? Of course, you can use PCR, but here's another method that's commonly used. It's called RFLP, or RFLP typing. So we'll learn about how it works. That's for DNA. We can look at also at protein, how are proteins analyzed. Here's an example of a slide we'll see from the class. Methods using proteins, or methods used to differentiate and study proteins. DNA cloning. Again, in very simple terms. We won't have time to go into great detail, but you would need to understand the basics you would need for answering questions in USABO. And then finally, we'll close with questions from past papers. So here's one on genetics. Here's one on DNA to RNA conversion. Here's one on evolution, understanding how to interpret phylogenetic trees. And then here's one based on fossils and evolution. Now the next 2 classes will focus on biochemistry and cell biology. So we'll start with different biomolecules. So proteins, what are the primary structure, what is the secondary structure, tertiary and quaternary structure, examples of these structures and proteins. We'll talk about different types of lipids. So here we're looking at triglycerides on the left and phospholipids on the right. How are these made? And why is this important to understand? They make up the cell membrane. So we'll learn about how the phospholipids are ideally suited to make up the cell membranes, the functions of the polar heads and the fatty acid tails. We learn about how carbohydrates are put together from monosaccharides. How do you make disaccharides? How do you make polysaccharides? This is through dehydration synthesis. What are the different ways in which you connect these sugars? Or what are different kinds of polymers you can make with these sugars? So here are 2 examples of polymers. They differ in the way they're linked. And and we'll learn about the function of these polymers, but more importantly, how they're linked. And these are commonly tested, as you know, in USABO. We learn about several biochemical pathways. Here are some examples of cycle. One is the Krebs cycle. We learn about how energy is produced in the body, in the cell, in the mitochondria. Here's another cycle called the urea cycle. So you convert protein to make urea, so you can excrete the urea in the urine. And then here's another example of a cycle called a Cori cycle. So we learn about different biochemical pathways in the body. And then cell biology, different components of the cell, different cellular processes. So here, for example, we're learning about the process of phagocytosis. What are the different players in phagocytosis, cell division? What are the different phases and events that happen during mitosis and during meiosis? So here we're looking at cellular respiration. What happens within all cells, happens within the mitochondria. We learn about the electron transport chain and how do you handle questions that focus on the electron transport chain, which are also common in USABO. And then we'll look at cytoskeletal elements. Again, this is another big topic area, commonly tested, so we'll learn about them and see how they actually look. And then we'll close with questions at the end of each topic, focusing on these topic areas. So here are some examples of questions focusing on either cell biology or biochemistry. And then the next two topics, the final two topics, focus on ecology and ethology. So we'll begin with a simple discussion of things we would have covered in the past. So your food cycle, food pyramid, and then a quick review of your biomes, and then go beyond that into understanding things you would know for USABO. We look at how organisms interact with each other. So here are different ways in which organisms can interact with each other. We look at some examples of each of these, some applications of each of these. So here, for example, is competition, which is very easy to understand. And then different kinds of coloration. So here's an example of cryptic coloration. Here's an example of aposematic colorations. Again, these are pretty easy to understand. And then responses in plants as well. So crypsis in plants, and what drives crypsis? What's the molecular mechanism that allows the mimosa plant to do this? And then we look at different species. In this case, we're looking at invasive species called starling, another invasive species. And then we have a big topic area, which is class number 12, is ethology. We talk about multiple innate behaviors, that's on the left column, and multiple learned behaviors, that's on the right column. So again, here are some examples of slides you'll see comparing classical versus operant conditioning, two different ways in which you can condition organisms, in this case pets, let's say. And then here is a topic we'll talk about when we discuss altruism. How does somebody make a decision as to whether or not to save, let's say, a relative who's drowning, right? And that's based on the Hamilton's rule. What's the Hamilton's rule? How do you calculate that? And how do you decide whether or not the person behaves as an altruist or not, right? So those are all examples of things we'll discuss in ethology. And then we'll serve. So here, for example, is the question, I think, on Hamilton's rule. Basically, somebody is drowning, and the question is, will the other person actually go into the river to save the drowning person? So that is calculated using the Hamilton's rule. So we'll do some problems based on that, and problems on other questions on evolution and ethology. All of these are from past papers in USABO. Okay, that's a quick overview of the 12 classes we will cover in the 12 weeks. And then I'll just say a few things about preparation for USABO, and then we'll elaborate a little bit more in the class itself. So here are different things that we'll discuss in the class. Again, we'll refer to, we won't discuss in great detail. So Campbell biology, I think, is a must, and I think many of you here are probably very familiar already with this textbook. It's a great textbook, easy to read, very informative. So make sure you do read it. You know, I think it's worth reading it cover to cover, and enjoy reading it, not just memorizing it, because there's a lot of fun facts in Campbell biology. And then you'll have a handout every week. So these are notes made from Campbell biology and other places. and I'm trying to make it as high yield as possible for a USA Biology Olympiad. And then another great resource is past questions. So trying to answer as many past questions as you can. And we'll also discuss a few other URLs that might be of interest for the students. And then we'll also discuss about some other books that you might want to read. But I think number 1, number 2, and number 3 are essentials. And then number 4 and number 5 are optionals. So that in a nutshell is what I want to say regarding preparation for the camp. And then I'll close with some unique aspects of this class. So it's relatively short. So as you can see, it's only 2.5 hours per class in the 12 classes. In each of these classes, which is 2.5 hours, right? I can extend it easily to 10 hours, right? There's so much information. It's almost impossible to squeeze it into 2.5 hours. So the goal is to provide you with the notes and the resources that you can access after the class, but more importantly, to focus on the more difficult to understand concepts, right? We'll focus on concepts and interesting real-world applications that may not be in the textbooks that makes the biology comes to life, right? So the lectures will be didactic lectures with as many animations and figures as possible, so easy to follow. Movie clips wherever is available or relevant. We'll have quizzes during the class, but you also have a take-home quiz. And then we already said the class notes are provided. So the goals of this class in fall, one is to deepen and broaden your interests and your command of biology, right? If you're a high school student, definitely you learn something from this class, hopefully. And so that's one important goal besides the exams. And number 2 is exams, to improve your competitive edge for the USABO competition. So the open exams should be a fair game, and we'll also hit several of the questions for semifinals. So this camp is not focused on semifinals and finals, but it's focused more on open exams and semifinals. So it depends on which level of preparation you are. If you've already taken the open exams and you have aced it and you've gone to semifinals, this may not be the best class for you. So this is more for students who are attempting the open exams, who have not done well in the open exams in the past, and similar students. And perhaps the most important reason that I'm interested in teaching this class is I enjoy learning about biology, so I enjoy teaching biology, so I hope you enjoy learning biology. And you'll place it in the context of real world application. See how it's really applied in the real world. Because after you finish your USABO competition, what next? You're going to go to college, you'll do some biology in college, but what next? You're going to work at some place, right? So you have to be able to apply the knowledge you learn in real world applications. So that's one of the goals of this class. So I think this is the last slide. So I'll stop here and then ask questions. So all of you can use the chat box, or you can just use the microphone. Yeah, so you'll have access to recordings for a limited time period. So you can see what you missed. Yes, answer is yes. Yeah. Other questions? So I'll keep this on for another 2 or 3 minutes, just in case somebody thinks of a question. Thanks for attending, guys. Thank you so much. Okay, so if there's no questions, we'll close here, guys. Bye bye. Where can I find the recordings after the meeting? So contact Momentum Learning and they'll direct you to the URLs. So I won't be sending this to you directly, but it'll be coming from Momentum. Okay, bye.